Hello and welcome back to YellowCard Vanguard. We're continuing our Bang Dream content, and today we'll be starting with our deck profiles. This is going to be a very high level deck profile. We're not going to spend too long talking about the deck, but instead we'll be talking more about its weaknesses, its strengths, how to beat it and whatnot. So before we go any further, I will just quickly go over the cards and the deck list and how it plays, and then we'll go into a bit more of the theory behind it. So let's get into it. So we'll start off with this lineup here. So we see the triggers, we see the music, and we see the three Casimys that we play. So we have the starter obviously, and then we have the grade 1. You mainly play it for the Vanguard effect, which is when you ride it, you can look at the top 7 cards of your deck, search for a grade 3 Casimy and add it to hand, and then shuffle. But it also has the nice rearguard effect, which is that it can return itself from rearguard circles to the bottom of deck to return any normal Poppin Party from your drop zone to hand. The grade 2 effect is when it's played, you can look at the top 7 cards of your deck and add a music from there to your hand. This is very useful, which we'll talk about once we get to the musics. But first we'll quickly go over the trigger lineup, which is just a very simple 4 heal, 4 draw PGs, and 8 crits. In reality, I think Poppin Party is actually one of the 2 decks that really wants to play crit Sentinels and just have 12 crit if it was possible. But unfortunately, Bang Dream doesn't have 12 crits, so that's not a thing we can do. So this is the next best, this is the most we can do otherwise. But be aware that the deck really wants to see as many critical triggers as it can. Not because it has easy time drawing all its cards, but instead because the critical trigger itself is relevant for a lot of effects, as you'll soon see. So moving on to the musics, we have 3 copies of Kizuna music. Its effects are, when your opponent Vanguard is grade 2, all of your front row gain 5k, and when it's placed, Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, add any card from there to your hand. This is one of the more important musics to any deck in Bang Dream, mainly because, as we'll talk about when we look at the effects of the rest of the band, seeing your specific pieces is very important for the deck, and so Kizuna music gives you the way of searching for whatever card you need within the top 5, provided it's there. Soul is a relatively easy resource, like only one of the cards consumes it. You don't have much ways of soul charging, but it is something that you shouldn't really ever struggle with. So Soul Blasting 1 to filter for a specific card is very, very useful. And then we have 2 copies of the grade 3 music, which is Returns. It's not the most important card in the deck, but it really helps you push in that final turn and just gives you that little bit of extra reach you need to push the game. So its effect is, at the start of your battle phase, you can look at the top 5, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. All of your units gain 5k for each critical trigger revealed this way. Then you can choose a critical from amongst those 5 cards, put it on top of the deck, and then put the rest on the bottom. So yeah, it functions a little bit like the Deer in Oracle Think Tank, Victorious Deer from a long time ago, in that it guarantees that you're going to be triggering a crit, which when combined with the grade 3 effect is obviously very, very useful. The only downside is that it itself is not a strict plus, and the 5k to the board is nice, but it's not really enough to really secure the game in a lot of times. The only good thing is that if you can somehow reveal multiple crit triggers off of it, like for example 2 or 3, then the power buff to your field is going to be way huger, and then that makes it a lot more viable. So that's the core of the deck. So then we'll move on to the actual main members. So including the grade 3 Casimy, each other member has 1 card, so I'll just go through them real quick. We play 4 of everything here. In fact, we play 4 of everything other than the musics, which we saw at 3 and 2 of. So everything here we play 4 of is the Tai, the Rimi, the Saya, the Arisa, and the grade 3 herself. So we'll start with the grade 3. Her first effect is that if you have 1 of each of the other members all on play, so Rimi, Tai, Saya, Arisa, all on the board, then the effects of your triggers apply to your entire front row. So it's like a small Ultima. So that in itself might not sound very impressive, but when you consider that you have Returns, which is stacking a crit trigger on top every time, and then combined with the Rimi, which can give your Vanguard a drive, you can find that you actually be able to put on a lot of pressure once you get your engine going. Of course, getting the engine going is something we'll talk about in a second, but you'll see that it's actually one of the weaknesses of the deck. The Casimy's other effect is what we'll refer to as the Music Searcher. Every band other than Razor Suilan has access to this, which is just Counterblast 1. If you haven't played a music this turn, search deck or drop zone for music and play it. So going from left to right, up to down, we've got the Tai. Her on play is discard a card from hand, return a music to hand. And the other effect is when your Vanguard attacks, Tai and your Vanguard both gain 5k. The first effect is borderline useless, I say a lot of the time. You have enough plussing and enough filtering that you can usually hit the order in hand when you need it, and especially if you're on grade 2, because you don't play any grade 1 orders, by the time you play Tai, which is on a grade 2 at least, then you'll be playing your grade 2 order anyway and you have the Casimy to search for them, so you don't really need to salvage musics on turn 2, and then beyond turn 2 when you're at to grade 3 you can just counterblast on to just search for them, and searching is better because it's deck thinning. And in fact, if you get from the drop zone as well, the Casimir is counterblast 1 rather than discard a card, so you can then afford to guard rather than negging for no reason. The plus 5k to Self and Vanguard is useful. It does help push a little bit of numbers, but again, it's not an amazing effect, it's just nice to have. The other grade 2, we have Remy. Her effect is when your Vanguard attacks, you can discard a card and then reveal a crit trigger from your hand in that order, very important. If you do, your Vanguard gains 10k and drive for the turn, which means that when you attack with your Vanguard, which goes first, which you should do because when you apply triggers to both front row, you'll be a 23k 3 drive minimum, which gives you a lot of reach, lets you dig for more crit triggers, and helps you push a bit more numbers, because when you get the 5k to the board from returns, Vanguard only gets 5k, so she'll be 28 including Remy effect, 33 including tie effect, but then your back row is going to be 13k boosters, plus the 10k from the triggers, so your columns will actually be bigger than your Vanguard. So the extra 10k to Vanguard really helps even out your power distribution. The Arisa is probably one of the most important cards in the deck. It's on play, Soul Blast 1, reveal a crit from hand, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose any Poppin Party from there other than Arisa and add it to hand, then shuffle. So this helps you dig for your other pieces. So if you already have a Arisa in play, and you're missing, say, one of the other 3 members to get your Ultima effect, then you can use her to dig for the other piece. It's the same effect almost as the grade 2 music, it's just a little bit more restrictive and requires you to have a crit in hand, but you can do it as early as turn 1, which is equally valuable. Then the last grade 1 is Sire, which is on play, counterblast 1, return any card from your hand to the bottom of your deck, to return from your drop zone a crit trigger and a Poppin Party normal unit. You can add 1 of each, so it's overall break even, including to the board, kind of a plus. It just means that you can afford to guard with your crits early when you need to, and then get them back to reveal them for Remy and Aris's effects. And as well as that, she's needed for the ultimate combo anyway, but she's one of the more important pieces actually, because it lets you be kind of not haphazard, but you can actually afford to guard with cards rather than thinking, oh, I need to hold on to this for my combo. You can guard with your Arisa, you can guard with your Remy, and then fetch them back later, and then keep going from there. So the idea is that by turn 3, you want to have a board that looks kind of like this, and then play returns, reveal 5, put a crit on top, pump your board, swing with your Vanguard, Remy effect, give your Vanguard a drive, reveal a crit, your front row gains 10k in crit, maybe reveal another trigger, your front row gains another 10k, and then you have 2 really big columns with a crit as well. Regarding the Force choice, I feel like the deck probably wants to go into Force 1 most of the time, because you're getting crits from returns anyway is the idea. Although if your opponent's on, say, 2 or 3 damage at grade 3, then I think Force 2 is also a reasonable consideration, because now, even though it's easier for them to guard the Casimir, they now have to aggressively guard with PGs or force a no pass, otherwise they risk just getting OTK'd by 3 or 4 damage on turn 3, which means that your other columns, which are going to be bigger and are harder to guard, are now much more threatening, and your opponent will have less resources to deal with that. And that's the overall list, kind of how it plays and the game plan it wants to go for. So now we'll switch to a view where you can see sort of the weaknesses of the deck and how you can play around it a little bit. So now I'll explain sort of how the deck plays, sort of what an ideal turn looks like, and some of its strengths. So here we've got all 4 members on board, we've got our music, everything set up. We don't have to jump through too many hoops. Because the deck doesn't actually have that much raw plussing, you only have the Arisa and the grade 2 music to search for your pieces, and you're very reliant on hitting them. It can sometimes be a little bit difficult to actually get to this field on the first grade 3 ride, so a little bit of luck is involved, but it's not like you need to aggressively high roll or sack people in order to get this combo. It's, you're playing 4 of everything, it's consistent enough. I haven't actually done the mathematics on it to see how often it comes up, but it should be relatively often enough that you can expect to see it when you need to. You'll miss the combo 1 every 10 games or 1 every 6 games or something along those lines. It's not too bad. But here you can see we've got everything here, so I'm going to play through the quick turn and then explain why this is strong, basically. So start of battle phase, returns effect will reveal top 5. Now this is one of the situations I want to explain where we actually didn't reveal a crit off of returns. But the thing is, returns puts them onto the bottom without shuffling, which means that we're now much more favoured to hit the crit trigger on our drive checks. The only downside is that our board doesn't get the 5k, which means that when they attack they'll only be 18 before any triggers, which is kind of low. But again, we'll be hitting triggers off of the drive checks because we're favoured, because we've just gone through 4 of them that weren't triggers, which means that they'll be 18, 28, maybe even 38 if we have enough triggers. So if we attack, we'll just reveal Remy's effect, discard and reveal a crit, see how many we get. So there's 1, and there's the second. So it's not the end of the world. These columns are still... So this column is still 38, and this column is 43 because of 5k from the tie. So it's not, nothing incredible, nothing impressive, but it's still enough to put forward a little bit of pressure where your opponent has to actually force to actively guard. You'll see that because we missed returns, losing the 5k to board made our 2 rearguard columns 10k weaker. So that actually does make a big difference. But the strength is, because you're basically drive checking a crit every turn, which gives your entire front row a crit every turn, it means that against decks that actively require a lot of counterblast, like say Blatant Joker, Dimension Police, you can very easily starve them of damage because they'll be on 4, and then they won't be able to take... They can't afford to guard to take any of these because they'll be lethal, but at the same time they'll need counterblast to do their plays, so they'll be unable to aggro you back as effectively because they have no counterblast open. So it's this sort of repeated crit pressure that really gets you going. Of course, the downside is that if you say reveal off of returns, hit no crits, and then drive check no crits, then yeah, the deck absolutely does nothing, your powers are really weak, and you have 0 pressure. But that's really unlikely to happen because you play 8 crit, so the chance of you not drive checking anything is really minuscule. The other downside of the deck is that if you say have to guard aggressively and you end up not having a critted hand for Rimi's effect, then losing that extra drive check can be the difference between winning or losing the game. Because for example, if these were in the reverse order, then the crit would have been the 3rd drive, which we would have missed, or perhaps you might need an extra 10k to board to break all your opponent's shield, like plus 20 rather than just plus 10. And again, that makes a really big difference when you're trying to push for that last damage to go for game and try and get through the last shield value in their game. So as I mentioned, you want to go Force 1 most of the time because you're gaining crits from your triggers anyway, and having more power on your Vanguard makes it harder for them to guard. But then, the thing is with that, like I said, if you're there on only like 2 or 3 damage, then yes, they will be able to afford to no-guard one of these rearguard columns, because then they're up to 5, provided you don't drive check multiple crit triggers. Which means that guarding early against Poppin Party is a really effective way of making their Ultima turns less threatening. Because if you don't need resources early, especially decks like, say, Overlord, that doesn't need counterblast early or can refund the counterblast really easily, you can guard super early, be on 1 or 2 damage going into grade 3, afford to take one of their rearguard swings, and then hit them back next turn with whatever it is you're trying to do with your open counterblast now. And then because they no longer have that instant kill pressure on you, you can then afford to guard a bit more easily and a bit more leniently, which will then help you guard the later attacks once they've burned through some of their crit triggers and are less likely to drive check the plus 10k to front row. So that's the second weakness of it, and then the final weakness is, of course, the turns where you don't see your 5 pieces. So, let's say for example at the start of our turn, this is in hand, and we don't have the Rumi in play, we draw for turn, and it's something like this. So you have another Arisa, you have another Sire, you have the Great Kasumi. At this point, in order to search for the Rimi that you need to go off, you need to waste your music slot, not on returns, but on Kizuna music, which is not even a guaranteed search, unlike an Afterglow. So the best we can do is play the Kasumi and try and top 7 to find Kizuna music, which we do find. And then we need that to then, on play, find our missing piece in the top 5. Which we were lucky enough to find. But a lot of the times when you need to do this, you'll see that it really takes away from your tempo, because now you don't have crit pressure on the board, you don't have a way of stacking the crits, you don't have any power. It's the same as whiffing the returns. So even though you can then neg yourself to then play the Rimi and set up your Ultima effect, you'll notice that being only 18 or 28k makes them significantly easier to guard, and so you lose a lot of pressure. I think this is sort of this play that you would still make, because turning on the Ultima is the most important part of the deck. Like, if you don't have your Ultima online, then the deck is literally vanilla, which is obviously pointless. In a way, it's kind of like you have to drop everything for this combo, and rather than get cards back to survive, your goal is to kill them so that they can't kill you back. I think this is actually one of the biggest weaknesses of the deck, and it's the fact that when you hit your combo, which is relatively consistent, it's strong, but it's not a guaranteed win. But when you miss your combo, it's a guaranteed lose. I think that's what makes the deck really weak and kind of unable to really compete with the top decks, because you have no backup plan, you have nothing that increases your consistency like grade 1 searches. The grade 1 searcher is on ride, not on play. you've got no other consistency pieces beyond the Arisa, which is reliant on you having crits in hand. And let's be honest, you don't really want to keep crits in your hand, you want them in the deck, and then you want to drive check into them naturally. So you'll be mulliganing your crits back in the early game, which means that if you don't see one in the first 2 or 3 turns from just draws or drive checks, you're again in a really weak spot because you'll lose the filtering from the Arisa, you'll lose the crit pressure from the Rimi, and it just becomes really dangerous to have. The second thing is the deck doesn't really have much outs, so if you're stocked up on music songs in hand, the only way you have of getting rid of cards is with Tae, who adds more musics which don't do anything for guard, and Saya, who adds back crits and normal units. So this is useful, but then you only have 4 of it, so you're kind of reliant on seeing this in order to turn your dead cards into live cards. And that's a really big risk you don't want to be taking, especially when sometimes she'll be the member you're missing to turn on Ultima in the first place. So I'll put the deck list up here on the screen one more time. You can see the ratios, the cards specifically, and the rest of that. I want to use this opportunity real quick to talk about the grade 1 music, which we're not playing, which is Double Rainbow. Its effect is, on play, you can draw a card, then look at the top 3 cards of your deck and add a crit from there to your hand. This is honestly one of the few pieces of plussing the deck has, but I think it's really not that worth it because A, it's a grade 1 music, so it's only really effective on turn 1. Like, you don't want to be playing it beyond turn 2, because on turn 2 you'd rather have Kizuna music, on turn 3 you'd rather have returns. And the second reason I think it's not very good is because you don't really want to spend cards to add a crit to hand. You want to be able to just drive check the crits naturally because you want to crit your opponent, because that's how you win the game. So by taking a crit out of your deck with an effect, you're reducing the chances of actually drive checking that crit. And sure, you might need the crit in hand to activate Arisa's effect or Rimi's effect, but losing that chance of drive checking I think is really valuable. So it's not a card that I want to dedicate a slot for, when instead I'd rather dedicate that slot to, say, another copy of Kizuna music to increase your consistency of hitting your members, as opposed to just a blind draw. Whereas, you know, top 5 add anything can guarantee you one of the missing pieces, whereas drawing doesn't guarantee that, and then top 3 for a crit, again, thins your deck for non-members, but you'd rather see triggers than members when it comes to like drawing cards and drive checking. So it kind of really doesn't work out as an overall net plus in the end. I think the deck is very strong against anything that's super reliant on counterblast, because you have this crit pressure all the time. You can starve them with damage when they're at 4, and it doesn't really cost anything. Like, for example, compare it to, say, Claret or Dimension Police, which need a steady stream of those cards to keep going and push every turn. This, once you have all 4 members on the board, provided they don't get retired or attacked, then after your first returns Ultima attack, you can just keep doing it every turn for just the cost of Counterblast 1 to replay returns from the drop zone. So as long as your pieces are in play, or you have pieces in hand to replace them, then you can just keep going, and it requires no further setup beyond finding the initial 4 pieces. So it's strong in that aspect, in that once the engine gets going, it's kind of hard to turn off. It doesn't require any more input. But then against decks like, say, Messiah or Overlord that can actually retire your rear guards, then you'll find that you'll be unable to both guard all their attacks and replenish your board. So when it comes to them retiring your units, you don't have a lot of recovery pieces, because again, very few things actually are a hard plus. They're just recovery. You'll become reliant on the grade 1 Casimir and the grade 1 Sire to get your pieces back. So you'll find that you'll run out of steam fairly often, and even though you can attack them with the crit front row again, you'll have taken too much damage to hand from guarding everything in the early games to be able to repeatedly guard and refill the board at the same time. So that's why I think the deck is really fun to play. I think the cards actually look really nice as far as CG art goes, and Poppin Party is one of my personal favourite bands in terms of music type. I really enjoy their songs. It's just a case of their effect is very gimmicky, and while it pays off and works well, I think it's too difficult to reliably do. It's not strong enough to really close out a lot of games. It's just kind of grinding them out, but you don't have the tools to grind because you don't have any pluses. And so you kind of just fall behind these other grindy decks like Messiah or Susanoo, but you also fall apart against these super big swingy decks like, say, Revon or Vanquish or MLB. So as a result of that, I think the deck's not super strong, but it's very fun, very worth playing, so you should definitely check it out when Bang Dream comes out in English, if it comes out in English, or if you're playing in the Japanese format, it's already out by now, so yeah, give it a check out. I've been Zistra with YellowCard Vanguard. This has been the first of our Bang Dream deck highlights. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed this. Someone has found this useful. If you want to see more, subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow all our socials down in the description below. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye bye.